Have you ever felt like there's something inside you that just won't shut up? A restlessness that has no name, but that has always been with you. Even when everything seems normal on the outside, there's a kind of silent call echoing inside, as if your soul is trying to remember who you really are. If this sounds familiar, maybe you're not experiencing a crisis. Maybe you're experiencing an awakening. Carl Jung called this the call of the self, an inner force that tries to reconnect you to your deepest essence, even if it means breaking the certainties you have built up until now. And that is where many people get scared, because the awakening of the chosen ones is not made of lights and angels. It begins with pain, with loss, with doubts. It begins when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who is there, but you also don't know who should be there. This video is for you who have ever asked yourself, why do I feel so much, think so much, suffer so much? And yet, you feel that there is something greater waiting for you. We will delve into the mysteries of the psyche, the shadows you hide, the archetypes that inhabit you, and the invisible journey that every chosen one must make. Spoiler, you are not broken. You are transforming. Here, we will understand how Jung spiritually translated what many call a crisis. We will talk about shadow, ego, self, fragmented soul, and the process of individuation, which, in practice, is the path to true spiritual awakening. If you are going through internal chaos, don't run away. It is in this chaos that your inner hero awakens. What you hear here may resonate with parts of you that you never knew existed. And perhaps, for the first time, everything that you thought was a weakness will begin to reveal itself as part of your calling. So take a deep breath. What follows is not a video, it's a mirror of your journey. The journey of a chosen one almost never begins with a grand revelation. It begins with a subtle discomfort, a feeling of displacement, as if the life you lead is too small for the size of your soul. Sometimes, it is simply a sadness with no apparent cause. Other times, an anguish that appears just when everything is fine. That is when the spiritual call begins, silent but insistent. Carl Jung said that this feeling is the self trying to emerge, asking for space. It is not the world that is wrong. It is the soul that is awakening. Perhaps you have asked yourself, why do I feel like something is missing, even though I have everything they say is important? This is not emptiness. It is a sign that your essence is knocking on the door. The ego, accustomed to routine, stability, and social approval, tries to muffle this sound. But the self does not shut up. It nudges, dreams, disturbs, until you can no longer ignore it. This is the beginning of the inner journey, when the noise of the world is no longer as distracting as the whisper of the soul. And yes, this confuses. And yes, this frightens. It's as if something inside you is saying, hey, there's more. There's something beyond all this. And no matter how hard you try to get back to normal, something always pulls you back in. Carl Jung saw this as an inevitable tension between the ego and the self, between who you've been taught to be and who you were born to be. And it's in that space between the two that the crisis begins to form. It's not a punishment. It's the beginning of a realignment. If you've felt this for years but never been able to name it, now maybe you'll start to understand. Many of the chosen ones spend years ignoring this calling, until it turns into a crisis. Relationships begin to seem superficial. Work loses its meaning. Small signs appear, symbolic dreams, synchronicities, disconnections. And what seemed like an emotional problem begins to seem like an awakening of the soul. It is the self forging a passage through the ego's defenses. It is the living myth within you asking for space to exist. It is not drama. It is destiny. You are not losing control. You are being invited to let go of control. The spiritual call does not come with maps or guarantees. It comes with doubts, with emptiness, with a feeling that something needs to change. And even without knowing what it is, you know that you can't stay the same. This is the invisible invitation of the inner journey. The soul begins to speak louder than the mind. And then, either you listen, or life begins to shout. So, if you've been feeling a strange discomfort lately, as if you're out of place in your own life, maybe it's the self trying to break through the surface. Maybe it's not a mistake along the way. Maybe it's a call to something bigger. Don't try to convince yourself that it's just a phase. Jung would say, it's a crossing, and every chosen one, at some point, needs to accept this call, even without knowing where it will lead. Once the inner call manifests, The next step of the journey is inevitable, the encounter with the shadow. And here we are not talking about something external, but about that part of you that was hidden, repressed, forgotten in the dark corners of the soul. Carl Jung was clear when he said, "Light does not come from the denial of darkness, but from its integration." And it is at this moment that the chosen one begins to feel the real weight of the crossing. It's not easy to look at what you've avoided for a lifetime, but it is necessary, because without shadow, there is no true awakening. The spiritual shadow is not only made up of bad things. It also carries talents that you buried for fear of rejection, emotions that you repressed to appear strong, desires that you hid to be accepted. All of this forms a hidden self, which, no matter how denied it is, continues to silently influence your life. And when the inner journey begins, this shadow moves. It appears in emotional triggers, in people you can't stand, in patterns that repeat themselves. And everything that seemed external reveals itself to be a reflection. The hardest part? Accepting that the shadow is not a mistake. It's part of the cure. Jung reminds us that we are not just what we show. We are also what we hide. And the chosen one, upon awakening, must have the courage to sit face to face with his pain, his anger, his shame, without judgment. Because only then does inner reintegration begin. Denying the shadow is like covering a cracked mirror with a pretty cloth. It doesn't solve anything. The journey demands truth. And sometimes the truth comes dressed in discomfort. This process can be painful. You start to remember things you tried to forget. You may feel guilt, regret, even disgust for parts of yourself you would rather not see. But this is the ego trying to maintain control. The psyche of the chosen one understands that this discomfort is a sign that something is emerging, something that needs to be seen, embraced, and transformed. The divine child within you cannot flourish while the shadow remains chained. The invisible passage inevitably passes through the cave you most avoid. And you know what's funny? The more you run away from the shadow, the more it appears in others. You start to project, seeing outside what you reject inside. Judgment becomes defense. Intolerance becomes shield. And the world becomes a stage for your internal war. But when you face the shadow, the game changes. Anger becomes courage. Sadness becomes empathy. Shame becomes humanity. And then you understand that you are not broken. You are just rediscovering pieces of yourself that were in the dark. So if you've been feeling overwhelmed by memories, confusing emotions, or disproportionate reactions, don't judge yourself. Breathe. Observe. Talk to your shadow, like you would talk to an old friend who's been silent for a long time. Carl Jung would say, what you need most is where you least want to look. And maybe, by opening that inner door, you'll discover that your pain has something to say, something that can change everything. Once you start seeing the shadow, something deeper starts to happen. A tension builds within the soul, a kind of duel between what you've always believed yourself to be and what you're beginning to feel yourself to be. Carl Jung called this the clash between the ego and the self. The ego is the character you've built to survive in the world. The self is the soul trying to remember who you came to be. And when the two clash, pain appears, not as punishment, but as a sign that truth is about to be born. The ego wants to keep things as they are. It likes what is familiar, what provides security, what pleases. The self, on the other hand, is not interested in pleasing others. It wants to liberate. That is why, when the self begins to emerge, your life may seem to be falling apart. Relationships lose their meaning, certainties crumble, old passions die. But this is not failure. It is the natural process of the soul seeking reconnection. It is the crisis of spiritual identity that arises when the soul can no longer bear to live half-heartedly. Perhaps you are suffering not because you are broken, but because you are resisting your essence. This may seem strange, but it is common among the chosen ones. Many think they are depressed, when in fact they are in transition. They are between two worlds, that of the persona created to please, and that of the self that yearns for expression. And this invisible war does not only happen in the mind. It manifests itself in the body, in the emotions, in the choices. You feel that something is calling you, but it also scares you. The ego, in its attempt to maintain control, can use very sophisticated strategies, self-deception, distractions, rationalizations, even superficial spirituality, all to avoid diving deep. But the self is patient. It insists, It whispers in dreams, provokes synchronicities, places coincidences in your path. It is as if the universe is gently pushing you until you can no longer go back. This moment, although uncomfortable, is precious. It is when the psycho-spiritual transformation truly begins. Jung believed that existential suffering is the soul's cry for reconnection. And the more you try to control it, the more intense the pain becomes. But when you let go, something changes. You begin to see meaning where before you saw chaos. You begin to feel relief even without answers. And you realize that you are going through not a ruin, but a reinvention. The ego will try to fight until the end. But the self, that one, is eternal. It does not scream. It just waits until you are ready. So, if you feel an internal conflict, a constant doubt about who you really are, perhaps this is the best news of your life. Because only those who have something to protect fight. And the self is trying to protect your destiny. Remember, you are not being destroyed. You are being realigned. The journey of the chosen one goes through this breaking point. Because it is in the crack of the ego that the light of the self begins to shine through. When the ego begins to give way to the self, something magical happens. Symbols begin to emerge. Vivid dreams, repetitive patterns, images that haunt you without explanation. Carl Jung called this the manifestation of archetypes, universal structures that live within the psyche and guide the soul's journey. For the chosen ones, these archetypes are not just ideas, they are guides. They are pieces of your own collective unconscious emerging to reveal something that the rational cannot explain. It is as if the universe is using metaphors to remind you of who you are. One of the most important archetypes in the chosen one's journey is the wise old man. He may appear in dreams as a mysterious teacher, an elderly figure, or even in phrases that you hear and feel as if they came from somewhere else. He represents your deep intuition, that inner voice that seems to know more than you have ever experienced. Ignoring this archetype is like refusing advice from a higher part of yourself. When he appears, it is usually a sign that the invisible path has begun to become clearer and that you are ready to listen to your own wisdom. Another striking archetype is the divine child. It represents the original purity of the soul, but also its creative and spiritual power. When this archetype appears, it is usually because you need to reconnect with your spontaneity, your sensitivity, and your ability to imagine new worlds. The divine child reminds you of who you were before you molded yourself to please. It is that feeling of, I knew I was different since I was little. It is the echo of a soul that was already awakened, even before it knew what awakening was. But the journey also passes through the guardian of the threshold, the archetype of blockages. This figure, which can appear as an enemy, an obstacle, or even a trauma, represents everything that prevents you from moving forward. He is not there to stop you, but to test your strength, your intention, and your truth. Jung taught that obstacles are not external barriers, but internal parts waiting to be integrated. When you face the guardian with courage, something inside you expands, and each step becomes an initiation. And of course, there is the shadow, which, as we have seen, is not an isolated archetype, but rather a gateway to all the others. Integrating the shadow is the first step to activating the remaining archetypes. Many chosen ones live fragmented lives because they refuse to accept these parts. And this is where the process of individuation gets blocked. You are not alone within yourself. There is a complex, rich, symbolic psyche waiting to be heard. And each archetype is a messenger of your personal myth, wanting to be lived, not just understood. So, if you have been having strange dreams, repetitive visions, or feel that certain themes keep coming up in your life, pay attention. These are Jungian archetypes manifesting themselves. These are images of the soul trying to guide you. Jung said that the unconscious speaks through symbols, and those who learn this language begin to find themselves again. Because the chosen ones are not guided by external factors. They are moved by internal voices, and these voices, when heard, activate something ancient, the inner hero. There comes a point in your journey when everything seems to fall apart. Relationships fall apart, certainties evaporate, the identity you've built begins to crumble. You try to resist, but you feel like you're being swallowed up by something bigger. This moment is known as the dark night of the soul, an old term, but deeply relevant today. Carl Jung saw this collapse not as an end, but as a gateway. It's the descent into the underworld of the psyche, where the old must die for the new to be born. And it's here that many chosen ones think they're failing, when in fact they're flourishing. The dark night is not glamorized. It hurts. It is lonely. It is confusing. It is the moment when you feel lost even after having studied spirituality, read books, taken courses. Because this process is not mental, it is existential. It is as if the universe were to strip you of everything that is not essential, leaving only the raw essence. And this essence, at first, is frightening, because it has no name, curriculum, or external approval. It only has truth. And this truth forces you to be reborn. Jung said that many breakdowns are actually desperate attempts by the self to emerge. When the soul feels that it is not being heard, it breaks the ego structures, not out of cruelty, but out of love. And the more you try to resist this phase, the longer it drags on. The secret is to surrender, not to run away. It is to accept that the ground has disappeared, yes, but maybe you never needed it. Maybe you are being invited to fly, not with external wings, but with internal roots. The dark night is actually a symbolic womb. It is the place where something dies so that something new can be born. But birth is painful. The ego screams. The mind doubts. Fear sets in. And this is where the chosen one needs to remember. This pain has a purpose. You are not being punished. You are being realigned. The chaos you feel is the old you leaving. And the peace that has not yet arrived is waiting for you on the other side. Don't run. Cross over. If you are in this moment right now, you may be hearing phrases like, "This will pass," or "It's just a phase." But between you and me, you feel like it's more than that, don't you? It's deep. It's transformative. And that's exactly why it hurts so much. Pain with purpose has a different flavor. It's not despair, it's childbirth. And every childbirth is chaos before it becomes a miracle. Carl Jung understood that before individuation comes deconstruction. And that, sometimes, in order to awaken, you have to first fall. So remember, the dark night of the soul is not a mistake. It's a rite of passage. It's the soul saying, it's time. You're not broken, you're being refined. The hero within you is being called forth. And the breakdown, as scary as it may seem, is just the beginning of a new cycle. A cycle where you stop surviving and finally start living with purpose. After the collapse, what is left? The essence. From there, true awakening begins. Carl Jung called this process individuation, a continuous path in which the chosen one begins to integrate all the fragmented parts of himself. It is different from evolving in the linear sense. Here, it is not about becoming someone better, but about becoming who you really are. The journey is not outward, but inward. It is a return to the essence. And each step in this process reconnects you to what was always there. It was just dormant. Individuation means uniting opposites, shadow and light, ego and self, pain and purpose. It is not about erasing the ego, but putting it at the service of the soul. It is about embracing the wounded child and the wise old man. It is about ceasing to live under the weight of the mask and beginning to live by the inner truth. The chosen one who goes through this begins to feel that he no longer needs to pretend, that he can be whole. With flaws, yes. With fears, yes. But with presence, authenticity, and soul. And that is liberating. At this point, many subtle transformations begin to occur. You begin to act more consciously. You begin to relate more truthfully. You begin to realize that what used to hurt you now reveals you. You stop reacting the way you used to. You begin to choose differently. This does not mean perfection, it means alignment. Reconnecting with the self brings a new sense, not of control, but of coherence. And coherence is the soil in which the self flourishes. It is there that the personal myth is born. Carl Jung said that individuation was, in fact, a spiritual process. The chosen one's psyche begins to organize itself from the inside out. And this is reflected in everything, in health, emotions, professional choices, even in the way you deal with time. You begin to live with intention, with purpose, with silence within, even if there is noise outside. This awakening does not shout. It pulsates. It guides. It does not promise ease, but it offers meaning. And that changes everything. The most beautiful thing? Individuation never ends. It is not a destination, but a path. At each stage of life, new aspects of the soul ask for a voice. New shadows emerge. New archetypes are revealed. New pains bring new cures. The chosen one understands that life is not a straight line, but a spiral. Each turn seems like a repetition, but it is a deepening. You return to the same point, with another level of consciousness. And it is in this spiraling that awakening remains alive. So if you feel like you're leaving old versions of yourself behind, celebrate. Even with the pain, even without the applause, the journey is happening. And each step, no matter how small, is shaping your inner reintegration. You don't have to run, you have to keep going. Because your mission doesn't start when you get there. It starts when you recognize yourself here, now, as a living myth, moving through your own story. Not everyone immediately realizes that they have embarked on a spiritual journey. In fact, many only realize it when the signs are already screaming. Jung said that the unconscious speaks first in whispers, but if we don't listen, it screams through life. And these screams have subtle forms, strange dreams, identity crises, feelings of displacement. The chosen ones often notice that something has changed, even if no one else does. And this change is not visible in the mirror. It is felt deep within the soul. One of the first signs is a change in dreams. They become vivid, symbolic, and often enigmatic. It is common to dream of stairs, labyrinths, animals, and archetypal figures. These are not just dreams. They are messages from the soul trying to guide the psyche. Jung saw dreams as letters from the self, symbolic codes that point to wounds, desires, and paths. If you have been dreaming intensely, stop ignoring them. Start writing them down. These symbols have more to say than you might think. Another strong sign is the feeling of not belonging. You may be among friends, family, colleagues, but you feel like you no longer fit in. Not because of arrogance, but because of authenticity. It's as if the old environment no longer accommodates the new you. This can generate loneliness, yes, but it's also a sign of transition. The call of the essence breaks the bonds that are no longer aligned. And this hurts. But it also frees, because you start to seek truer, more conscious, more complete connections. The attraction to spirituality, mythology, and deep psychology is another powerful indicator. Suddenly, you become interested in books like Man and His Symbols, in mythical stories, in content about archetypes, the unconscious, the shadow. It is as if the soul says, "Now I am ready to understand." It is not about becoming a mystic. It is about wanting to understand your internal structure. What was previously uninteresting now moves you, because your soul is opening up and asking for real nourishment. You may also notice mysterious patterns repeating themselves. Similar situations that happen again and again with different people. Recurring obstacles. Signs out of the blue. Jung called this synchronicity. Occurrences that seem like coincidences but carry deep meaning. If you find yourself saying, "This can't be just a coincidence," pay attention. Maybe it's the self trying to communicate. Maybe your soul is saying, "Hey, look at this. There's a key here." If you identify with these signs, breathe. You are not going crazy. You are awakening. These phenomena are a natural part of the path of the chosen ones. And even if the world does not understand, you know, deep inside, that something has changed. And once this inner door opens, there is no turning back. Because when the soul awakens, it no longer accepts sleep. The call has already been made. The journey has already begun. And you are no longer the same. Perhaps one of the biggest lies you've been told and believed is that you're broken. That feeling too much is weakness. That questioning everything is confusion. That not fitting in is trouble. But Carl Jung offers us another view. What you call brokenness may be the beginning of reintegration. The chosen one doesn't suffer because he's flawed. He suffers because he's deconstructing himself to remember who he is. And this process, as lonely as it may seem, is sacred. The psyche of the chosen one is different. It is not content with the superficial. It cries out for depth, for meaning, for symbolic healing. That is why the pain you feel is not random. It has a purpose. It is pulling you back to yourself. Jung said that the soul has mysterious paths, and that, many times, it guides us precisely through the wounds. The wounded soul is, in fact, the seed of the new being. Chaos does not define you. It refines you. When you start to see this, something changes inside you. Guilt gives way to compassion. Shame becomes awareness. and suffering stops being an enemy and becomes a messenger. You understand that you don't need to fix yourself, you need to reunite. Reuniting the forgotten, abandoned, rejected parts. This is what inner reintegration is, holding hands with the versions of yourself that were left behind. And when that happens, you no longer feel lost, you feel whole. Psycho-spiritual transformation is exactly that, leaving survival mode and entering presence mode. You begin to live with more truth, more lightness, more meaning. Not because everything around you has changed, but because you have changed inside. Jung said that healing does not come by avoiding darkness, but by consciously illuminating what lives within it. And this process is not magical. It is human, it is real, and it is accessible to those who have the courage to feel. You don't need definitive answers right now. You just need to take an honest step in the direction of your soul. And that step starts with a decision, to stop seeing yourself as a flaw, to stop treating yourself as a ruin. The hero within you isn't seeking perfection, it's seeking truth. And the truth is that you are coming home. Not a physical home, but a state of mind where everything makes sense, where shadow and light can finally coexist. So, if today you feel pain, emptiness, confusion, embrace it. Breathe. You are not alone. You are going through a profound process of rebirth. The journey is silent, invisible, but extremely powerful. You are being reintegrated. And every tear, every doubt, every new beginning is part of it. Carl Jung would not tell you be well. He would tell you, be whole, because your pain, deep down, has always been the frame of your calling. Now that you've come this far, you may feel a sense of relief, like someone who finally finds the words to explain what they've always felt. You may also feel a weight, because you know there's no going back. And that's okay. True spiritual awakening is not an end. It's a beginning. It's the point at which you stop running from what you feel and start walking with who you are. Jung taught us that pain is not a mistake in the system. It is the soul's invitation for you to truly look at yourself. And the chosen ones, no matter how much they try to escape, always end up hearing this call. Maybe you are still in the middle of the journey. Maybe you are just beginning. But if you have come this far, something in you has already awakened. And what awakens never goes back to sleep. Now, look at your story with more compassion. See your breakdowns as chapters in a larger myth. Understand that your inner conflicts are not signs of weakness, but portals of transformation. And that your shadow, your pain, your search, they are all part of the same dance. The dance of the ego with the self. The dance of the soul trying to return home. The hero within lives within you. And he doesn't wear armor. He wears courage. He stumbles, he falls, he cries. But above all, he keeps going. And his journey, however silent it may seem, is awakening others around him. Because when a chosen one awakens, he lights a light in other hearts, even without saying a word. So if this message spoke to your soul, comment below with the word, awaken. That way, I'll know you heard the call, and that you're ready for the next step. And of course, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because together we will continue exploring the deep paths of the soul, psychology, spirituality, and symbolic healing. You are not alone. The journey is yours, but the path we share.